Mr. Rainwater.
Hey there, Jow.
After a year and a half of me gushing about a particular film series, you finally binged them within like a week or two.
Yeah, it was about a week and a half, I guess.
And now we're going to talk about it. And it's a little timely since the most recent installment just came out. We're talking about Scream, the horror franchise.
And quite a horror franchise. It's probably the only horror franchise that I've actually watched all the installments of.
You know, when I first started getting into it, it was easily, I mean, granted, it was still formative in my horror genre years. But it's definitely the first one that I watched all of at the time when I was still doing that. But even to this day, I think the only other horror franchise I can honestly say that I've watched all of the installments are the Halloween movies. And outside of that, I can't say honestly that I've seen every movie in every franchise. Friday the 13th, not a chance in hell. Nightmare on Elm Street, I've seen a bunch of, not all of. I've seen a bunch of the Exorcist movies. I've seen some of the Hellraiser movies. I couldn't tell you which ones. The Leprechaun series, I've seen cherry picking here and there. But anyway, so we're going to talk about Scream today. If you have never seen the Scream movies, and if you haven't seen any of them or all of them, you probably don't want to listen to this episode because it's impossible to discuss them without talking spoilers. So
you cannot talk about the newest one without spoiling from the very get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't seen any of those movies, take a page out of Mr. Rainwater's book and go check them out and then come back and do it. Or just listen to this episode whenever you finally get around to it. But we're going to talk about them today. Let's start off with the very first movie. Now, I got to ask this because it's fun for me to ask people this because I don't get this opportunity. Most people that I've speak to have long seen it beforehand. You watched the very first movie and the second movie during my Haunted Home Theater presentation, correct?
That's right.
So, going in, what were your expectations? Did you have any trepidations? Like, you know, I know you're not a horror guy, so were you like apprehensive of the fact of, wow, we got to sit through this fucking slasher because Jow is like a crazy person for this kind of gore crap? Yeah,
that's an interesting way of putting it, because one of my first expectations was that it was going to be more like a slasher movie, which it really isn't.
No.
Like all of the Scream movies really are not slasher movies. They have slasher elements.
Sure.
But I was really surprised. The thing that I was most surprised by with the first Scream is that they're basically like mystery movies.
Absolutely. 110%.
And that really grabbed me. Like, I was really surprised by that. And I was like, oh, this is like kind of interesting. And I'm curious to see where it goes. And that's definitely what got me into wanting to watch the second film. And it's something that carries all the other films afterwards, right? It gets a little harder to carry that steam as you start to recognize like the patterns, especially with 3 and 4.
Yes.
3 did all right, but 4 had a...
We're going to get there. Let's take our time.
Yeah.
So the $1 million question is not necessarily, and I guess this is kind of like a forgotten aspect of the original first movie, is not necessarily were you able to guess who the killer was, but more so the aspect of were you able to guess that there were 2 killers?
Oh, no, I had no idea that there was going to be 2 killers. That was the thing that really took me by surprise. Because there's there's a point in that movie where you find out, you know, who the main killer is, basically.
Sure.
And there's such a back and forth, you know, where it's like, I don't know if it's him. I don't know if it isn't gonna, you know, it's like, and then it ends up being Cindy's boyfriend, right?
Correct.
And so they have sex. And I'm like, oh, so it's probably not him. And then they totally turn it, right? And I'm like, oh, fuck. Where does this go? And I'm trying to remember at what point in the movie that they also reveal, I can't remember the character's name. I just remember him as Shaggy. Matthew Lillard. Yeah, Stu, yeah. um, there's a point when he comes into the movie, and I'm like, oh, okay. Because, like, that's the point where it's the kitchen scene, basically, at that point.
It's right before the kitchen scene. Billy stumbles down the stairs, still playing like he got attacked by Ghostface.
Yes.
And then Sidney gives him the gun, and then he turns around and shoots Randy, and he spats off the psycho quote, but then Sidney tries to make a run for it into the kitchen, and she runs right into Stu, and it's like it's a reveal right then and there, both of them.
By the way, I think in Haunted Home Theater, you had referenced it as like the infamous scene 118 or something like that.
Correct.
That was the point at which I was really into the movie, because that whole like the party murder scene is
like an hour 15 of the runtime. It's half the movie.
Yeah, and it's just back to back, like kind of insanity. You're not really sure what's going to happen, and like people are dying left and right. Like,
well, because if you think about it, there's really not that many on-screen kills before then. No, they kill Casey and Steve in the opening sequence. They just attack Sidney 2 or 3 times. They're not good enough to get her. And then because they needed another kill, the fucking Weinsteins were like, oh, why don't you kill the principal? He's not in the rest of the movie. And then they were like, all right, we'll kill the principal. And so they kill off Henry Winkler. But that's it. Those are the only people that get murdered up until the party scene. And it's like a kill count of 3 in a horror movie is fucking terrible.
I will also say, like, something that movie in particular does very well, I think, compared to the other movies. Although I would say that the most recent Scream does it pretty well too, is putting you on edge and not being sure on who the killer is, and giving you a lot of false readings. Because there was a while where I was like, oh, maybe it is Henry Winkler. Like, maybe he's the killer. Because there's a lot of, like, little things that were making me think, like, oh, this guy's creepy. What's up with him? You know? But there are moments like that for almost every character.
Yes.
In that.
Absolutely.
Because I had moments with that for, what is his name? Is it Dewey?
Yep.
Yeah, David Arquette's. I just remember everybody by their actor's name. But there was a point where Dewey's kind of like, I'm not sure what this dude's about, you know?
Yeah.
Which I gotta say, it's kind of a bummer going forward in the movies where I get to the point where it's like, okay, we're ruling this person out. We're ruling that person out.
Yeah.
Like, I think after 2, it was very easy to rule out Dewey and Gale.
Sure.
Because at that point it feels like, oh, these are the principal characters throughout the series, which kind of takes away from the tension a certain amount.
Absolutely, I would agree. But I will second your notion though, because I remember the first time I watched Scream, not knowing who the killers were, and I thought it was Dewey. I was 99% sure he was the killer.
No, there's a couple of scenes where he has really creepy vibes. Like there's a scene where where Sidney's hanging out with his sister, I think.
Yep.
And he comes into the doorway, and like he's just watching them, and there's vibes in the movie that suggests that like Dewey has some kind of crush or something on Sidney.
I can see that.
You know, and they kind of carry that out a little bit further into other movies too.
Yeah, but
every once in a while,
it kind of it really evolves into a more. You start understanding he's just like a Big Brother type. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's but in the beginning when we don't know him, that reads totally different. But it's
by 3
consistent.
they definitely. Yeah,
oh, absolutely.
By 3 they definitely establishes like that Big Brother type.
Yeah.
Of relationship.
What were your thoughts when because they like you said they make Billy the boyfriend very creepy, and then they flat out point the finger at him, have him be arrested. He's got the phone fall out of his pocket right after the attack on Sidney. It's like, oh well, it's fucking him. Like everybody's like, I fucking knew it. And then they turn around, oh, Billy was released. We checked his cell phone. He didn't make those calls. Yeah. That to me is one of the most brilliant things about that first movie is you point the spotlight right at the killer. And
then take it away.
Then everybody's assuming, oh, okay, he's the killer. And then they say, hey, look, he's the killer. And like, oh, I figured it out. And then they're like, no, he's not the killer. Oh, and then that puts you completely off. And then if you were so meta in 1996 that you could pick up on that writing style that they were trying to manipulate right there, they were like, just to fuck with them a little more, let's do like a fake stabbing. You know what I mean? Like they really went through the motions to make sure the audience did not see it coming. And
that movie does a really good job of that. I would definitely say that out of all of them, the first Scream is probably my top favorite. Just in terms of, there's so much in that movie that happens that I think is done in such a way where I think I could go back to watch it and it still would be really engaging, you know? Yep. Whereas I think 2 through 4 suffer a little bit. And this is where you and me are going to probably...
Watch your words around too, my friend.
This is probably where you and me are going to have a certain amount of disagreement with regards to 2.
Okay, so let's get into that then. Because I think that's... I mean, 1 is what it is, but the real dissection starts becoming, the majority of the rest of the franchise. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on 2. Which you watched through Haunted Home Theater, but on delay. You watched it on like a on-demand style type thing, which I totally understand.
Yeah, because I had watched it a day later, basically.
So what's the headline right off the bat?
The headline is that the third act in 2 is on par with the third act in 1.
Okay.
But the rest of the movie, it didn't grab me in the same way. I did like what they did with Cotton's character.
Okay.
Like, that was a very interesting arc that he had. In kind of playing up so much of he's trying to make the most of, like, being gotten out of jail and all that stuff, having been a killer, or having been misidentified as the killer, and all the stuff with Gail, right? Like, they do a very good job of establishing all that stuff. My issue with 2, and this is my issue with 3 and 4, is 2 starts to get really heavy into the meta stuff. And the more meta stuff comes into the Scream movies, the less that I enjoy them.
Interesting.
I really like the newest one a lot, but there are scenes where they are like going on with the rules that I just zone out. Because it's just like it's not interesting to me. I understand the point of it, but they feel like very overly elongated exposition. Whereas the first Scream had that, right?
It was original in the first movie. It wasn't something. It was something you hadn't seen before. Yeah.
In the way that it was done in the first Scream is just it's
organic.
I think it fits better in. Yeah, it is more organic, and it's done in the video store, so like you're already visually set up.
Well, no, the rules in the first movie, the rules are done in the party scene when they're talking about.
Oh, it is in the. I'm sorry.
They're talking about suspects in the video store, but they're talking about the rules much more organically because they're not talking about. They're not talking about using the rules to solve who the killer is. They're using the rules to just talk about movies in general. Do you know what I mean? The audience understands that the rules are applied to this movie, but the characters don't realize that the rules apply to what's going on around them. And that's what's interesting about it too. And I agree with this, where they start spouting off, they have Randy spout off the rules again, but they do it in order to try to figure out who the killer is. And it feels less organic. And I will concede point. I've never really thought about it until you just brought it up, but you're absolutely right. It's less organic that way. 100%. I don't care because I love Randy and I love the rule scenes. But you are right. It is less organic, and I could see where it could take away from somebody for that film. So I concede that point.
And I think the other thing is the characters. I have a harder time relating to a lot of the characters from 2 through 4. By 4, it's like I don't give a fuck about any of these characters, but like, Randy's a good character to like pay attention to, and 2, I hated the way that he died. It was very unceremonious and kind of just like, and we're done. He's not going to be a legacy character. Don't expect it.
Well, keep in mind that at that point in time in 1997, the concept of a legacy character was nothing. In fact, in the original 96 Scream, Dewey was supposed to die. he was supposed to be dead. So like when he gets when Gale gets knocked out during the final showdown between Billy and Stu, Wes Craven instructed David Arquette, don't breathe, you're dead. So when she falls on you, you know what I mean? Like there's no whatever. But then at the end of the movie, they shot 2 alternates. One where Dewey came out on a stretcher, and one where Dewey came out on a gurney. So like it was like, and one he's dead, and then they would just decide in editing. So and what they ended up doing was they went with the one they kept the one with him being alive. So like right from the get-go, legacy characters were never really a thing.
Sure.
To me, Randy's death is what elevates 2 above 1. Because
I get what you're saying there, because then it's like,
fuck your legacy characters. Yeah,
for sure,
exactly.
For sure.
And that's not, and because to some extent in the past in horror movies and other franchises, I should say, legacy characters became immediately untouchable. You know what I mean? Like killing off someone who was already in one of the other films that had survived was just a no-no. It was just like, we're just going to bring that character back because everybody loves him. And so in this, they just had the balls to say, no, which one's your favorite? Okay, he's dead. And you know what I mean?
Sure.
And it really, it elevates the second movie above the first, because people go in with that safe assumption of, okay, these are like how you said, where eventually you don't suspect Gale or Dewey to be killers because they're legacy characters. And it's the same thing here. It's like you don't suspect any of the main character surviving core from the first movie are going to die. So it makes it feel a little bit more pedestrian and easygoing. But halfway through the movie, when you murder him, then all of a sudden, oh shit, no, everybody is up for grabs. And then additionally, my favorite part about Randy dying is that shortly thereafter, it's not the next scene, but shortly thereafter, you get to see Sidney mourning his death, which in horror movies never fucking happens. Somebody gets murdered viciously, and it's just like, oh my God, what are we going to do? No one stops to be like, oh my God, Randy's dead? What? Like, you know, like crying, like sobbing, blaming themselves, like, survivor guilt and all that kind of thing. That kind of theme never gets explored in horror movies. And to that, while yes, the meta stuff did kind of start getting out of hand, not completely, but start. That kind of stuff grounds it a lot more. And then the following scene after that, you have Gale and Dewey mourning in their own way, where they kind of argue. They're like their tempers are elevated because the Randy died, and you can see that they're kind of feeling that guilt from it. And to me, that's what hits me as an audience member, is feeling that emotion of, this sucks. This really is horrible. But at least it's being acknowledged and referenced on screen, which in normal slasher flicks, it's just like, okay, they're dead, moving on. So like you did point out, it was kind of unceremonious how it happened, but the fallout from it is what to me is really where the strength in that decision lies. And
that definitely points to a thing that I like in the series overall, is that there is weight to all the deaths that happen. Most.
It diminishes as the series goes on. That's the problem.
It's true. That's very true. But it gives you the sense of like, these are small town murders where everybody knows each other. So like when something happens, everybody gets wind of it. So it doesn't just happen in a vacuum, like in what it seems like to me in most horror movies, where people die and nobody knows what's going on. Yep. So it seems very disjointed from reality, because it ends up
being that question of, well, if there's a monster on the loose, why wouldn't you get the fuck out of town?
Yeah, exactly. Which is something that happened in the most recent Scream,
right?
Which is a very
in this movie, this is where these characters live, and it's not like it's easy to pack up and go out of town. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, but even in 2, Joel the cameraman. Listen, I'm about to get the fuck up out of here.
Yeah.
And then he does. And the brilliance that it's played for is, well, he just left town. Obviously, he's now a suspect. Like, before he was just like the kind of a token black guy, wisecracking character. Yeah. And now all of a sudden,
Joel is a great character.
Oh, I love him. But then suddenly he becomes a suspect because he's quote unquote out of town. Now we can explain why he's off screen. And things like that to me are brilliant, because it's like, okay, yeah, this character does what I would suspect a person would do. It's like, all right, this is not worth my job, and I know what happens to black people in these movies. Hell, it happened in the opening scene. Like, I'm out of here. Let's talk about the opening scene, which is fucking brilliant. That they're watching the first movie, the opening sequence of the first movie, in the second opening sequence of the second movie, in a crowd full of fucking ghost faces, and two people are horribly murdered in front of the audience who are cheering it on. To me, that's nightmare fuel, because in my mind, things like that could actually happen in a regular situation, like a midnight showing in like regular town. I think that somebody would interfere, like step in and be like, "Hey, hold on a minute, something's not right."
Right.
In a college town, different story. And that to me,
like the Travis Scott thing, kind of.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. Well, there are scenarios where that happens.
Right. And to me, the meta-ness of it is fun, but it never detracts from the horror in that particular moment. It adds to it, in my opinion, just because of the idea of that you're surrounded by people, and none of them want to help you, but you also can't in a paranoid, emergency situation such as that. You don't know which one of these people wearing the exact same mask as the person stabbing you is in on it, or the actual person stabbing you, or whatever. And then there's like that solemn moment, like when she's on the stage in front of the screen and all the people just start taking their masks off to look at her. It's almost like, hey, are you okay? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it starts hitting home.
Right.
That stuff isn't overlooked. Whereas in some lesser horror movie, I think the crowd would just keep cheering, and then they would cut to opening credits. But in this, they were like, nope, everybody take your masks off. And then people are like, oh no, what's happening? Like, I can't take this. It's very real. And to me, that kind of stuff elevates 2 over 1, because in 1, like I talked about in Haunted Home Theater, you got Ghostface sneaking around 7-Eleven in broad daylight. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, nobody's looking for this. Everybody's looking for this everybody's looking for this goddamn costume. It's all over the news. Linda Blair's holding up the mask, yada, yada, yada. There's no fucking way he's getting into 7-Eleven, and you know what I mean, unnoticed. And for 2, when you're watching a theater full of Ghostface, then it's like, well, wait a minute. In this situation, absolutely that works. Like, I completely buy that someone could be walking around in a Ghostface costume and nobody's gonna question it, or you know what I mean? Right. Like, there's no protocols to stop that from happening. So they took criticisms that I had about 1 and then revisited them in 2 and totally made them work 1,000 times better.
Well, not only that, but I mean, from a storytelling perspective, it's such a cool idea to think of it in the sense of, okay, here's how we think the ideas or the things that happen in this movie affect the world, right? Yeah. Because the movie, as a sub theme, basically the movie goes into touching on what were big things going on at the time culturally. About like violence in movies and how it affects people, blah blah blah. Like, that was around. The Tipper Gore type era. That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what year that was, but that was like violence in movies, violence in video games. So the writer was like, let's just take it head on and talk about it within this movie, and it works really well. Like, it works in regards to considering it, and also critiquing it at the same time. Sure. And that's something that I like that these movies tend to do, is they're not just one point of view. It's not exploitive about it. Yeah. And that's something I want to go back to in regards to not just 1, but 2 as well. But 1 starts this, which I really liked, was like having a story where all angles are considered in such a way where you start to think, oh, well, maybe there is something up with Sydney's mom, you know, like she isn't just the purely innocent victim that Sydney thinks of her as. Sure. And she's still a victim, but she had her own set of things that played into, her past. And then going with the whole thing with Cotton, where it's like he's not the real killer, and then carrying that forward into 2, right? that is such a, like, I don't feel like that's something that you would see in recent movies.
No.
Things are so cut and dry in recent movies, and that was something I really liked about the first Scream in particular, is that it has this open-ended quality to it that I think is more reflective of actual crime in the real world, where everybody's suspect, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm.
And carrying this over into 2, right? Something you had pointed out in Haunted Home Theater that I appreciated was how unexpected, like, one of the killers is.
In 2?
In 2. Where it is fucking Billy Loomis's mom.
Laurie Metcalf, aka Aunt Jackie.
Like, I was I was really taken aback by it because I didn't expect it. And it was funny the way you were talking about it, because you're like, yeah, it's right in front of you. You don't expect it. It's right there. And I didn't expect it because that character comes in and out, kind of in competition with Gale in terms of doing the coverage for these murders. And then when she shows up, I'm like, oh shit, I did not see that one coming.
And it literally is there from the very beginning. So like when Omar Epps gets murdered in the bathroom stall at the movie theater, he's putting his ear up to the bathroom stall because he's hearing whispering coming from the stall next to him. And what the voice is saying was, "I'll tell you why I did it, mommy. I'll tell you why I did it. Listen, mommy. Listen, mommy." So right there from the opening moments, the idea of a mother, you know what I mean? Like is automatically dropped into it. And then if you look, so there's right before Randy gives the rules to Dewey in Baskin Robbins, they show a clip from the fake stab movie where Luke Wilson and Tori Spelling are recreating a scene from the original Scream where they're in the hallway talking about, their moms. And Sydney's like, my mom's dead. She's never coming back. But the key to that scene is not that. The key is the exposition we're getting refed from Luke Wilson playing Billy Loomis saying, when my mom left town, I da-da-da-da-da. He's reminding us, I have a mother. My mother's estranged. And, your mother broke up my family. Like all these things are like specifically planted so that when you go back and you rewatch it, you're like, oh, they've been telling us all along, hey, don't forget about Mrs. Loomis, mommy, look, like, and when you finally watch it and it's like, oh, holy shit. And then of course, she's fucking, I don't want to say she's chewing scenery, but she's fucking murdering that scene. Laurie Metcalf is so, I don't want to say campy, but she's like octane 11 on that scene. And I love it. I fucking love it.
Yeah.
And then Timothy Olyphant, same thing. He's got a little bit of Billy, a little bit of Stu, a little bit of Randy all mixed together in him. But my favorite thing about Olyphant, being revealed as the killer, yes, he's got a kind of a weak motive.
That's how I felt. I felt like when he was revealed, I was like, okay, I don't know.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that when we get to 4. But the one thing that I did love about his character in that end scene is the way he's fucking gaslighting Sydney. So like Sydney's arc the entire movie is she's got trust issues now. She doesn't know who to trust, especially now that Randy's been killed and her boyfriend tried to kill her. And really the only person that she trusts in that very moment is Dewey. That's the only person I could see her trusting. Not even Gale. Like, and I think we all were kind of a little, I don't know, it could go either way on Gale for this one. But I think everybody trusted Dewey at this point, even myself included. But the way Mickey fucks with her, he's like, boyfriend killer. Come on, we got her. What are you doing? Like putting her on, fucking with her head. To me, solidifies him as a different level psycho. Like, do you know what I mean? Like he's enjoying the cat and mouse of it. Whereas other killers like Stu or ones that we'll get to in the further installments, they have very similar motives to that, but they don't really play that cat and mouse the way he did. And that to me elevates him above the rest of them. And to be honest with you, when Randy's laying out the possibility of who could be killers, the only reason that Randy doesn't suspect him is because he's so close to him himself. It's basically the evil Randy. So it's like, I don't want the finger pointed at me, so let's not look at him. And that little stroke of ego is really what is Randy's undoing, not so much the having sex with Karen Kolchak kind of shit.
I will say, so there is one scene that really frustrates the hell out of me, and that is right before Hallie's death, when they're getting out of the car.
Yeah.
And the whole time I was like, just take off the mask. Take off the fucking mask.
Yeah.
You can solve. You can at least get halfway there, you know?
And that's why Sydney turns back. I mean, in that moment, I could see someone being like, I got to get out of this situation. I got to get my friend out of this situation. And then you start to run away. But Sydney has that moment of clarity. It's like, no, if I pull this off, we're done. It's over. And you know what I mean?
Well,
like,
it's also the fact that the killer in that moment, in my mind, I was just trying to figure out, like, what's the logical reasoning for this? Because they're climbing over the killer.
mm-hmm.
They don't take the mask off. They don't do anything to, like, detain the killer or anything.
Yeah.
And to me, that just seemed, it was an odd scene to me, because to me, it seemed like the tension felt artificial, because it seemed like you could just kick the killer out of the car. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
there's different types of ways that people could solve that particular situation. I don't know. I feel like in that moment, it's one of those like fight or flight scenarios where, and you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, and their instincts were flight. Get out of the car and run away and let that be that. And I think that's why Sydney stops after they've escaped that danger and she's gotten her friend out of that situation. It's like, no, wait a minute. There's a better way to handle this. And then obviously it's too late to figure that out.
Right.
But in that moment, I don't know how I would react. I can't say with absolute certainty that my gut instinct would say to myself, hey, pin this motherfucker down, just start choking him, grab the knife from him, unmask him. You know what I mean? Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if the killer is playing possum in that particular situation. And you know what? So I don't know if climbing over him is the best option in a possum situation. But either way, I don't know. It's hard to argue that someone would be thinking clearly after what just happened with the driver getting knifed, the other guy getting a pole through his head. You're driving around recklessly with a murderer in the front seat, and then you get into a car accident in a construction site. It's the middle of the night, no one else is around to come and save you. You know what I mean? Like, you factor in all those things, and it's really kind of hard to say. It's easy for an audience member to go, well, fuck, I would just fucking kill him right there. Like, it's easy for us to say that because we're watching a movie, but in an actual situation like that, I don't know how my brain would function. So I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, but really, I mean, I've said this during Haunted Home Theater. My biggest takeaway after gushing about this movie so much so far is that they shot it like while Scream 1 was still in the theaters.
That is pretty nuts. That is like, it tells me that they were thinking about it as very holistically, and it does feel that way, because 2 does feel like an extension of 1 as a story, and not just as we're going to make a franchise. Yeah.
And
even 3 does. Like, even 3 feels like, another a continuation of the story in the regards to how they treat it.
Absolutely.
What were you going to say, Jow?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, like, it's the original trilogy, 1, 2, and 3, which was what it was intended to be. There wasn't intended to be a 4, 5, 6. Really is beautiful in my mind because it has arcing characters and it focuses on Sydney as someone who's dealing with a traumatic situation that doesn't seem to stop. Even though she, can get rid of it, it always seems to circle back to her, like she's become a light for these moths. You know what I'm saying? Like they like all of a sudden she's the trophy. And it's interesting to me to watch 1 and 2 because most people will rank 2 up with 1. Like they'll put it like a peg lower sometimes, but it's like almost neck and neck where they say that.
Yeah.
There's a big drop off on 3, which we'll talk about in a moment. But for me, 1 and 2 to have been made so closely together and to have been so up there in quality, not just in terms of story consistency, character growth, artistic merit. Like I talked about this in Haunted Home Theater. It starts in a movie theater and it ends in a stage theater. Like the bookend aspect of that is beautifully meta and not just cringe meta, where you're just like,
Sure.
oh, it's fucking meta. Like, it's just like, no, that's kind of beautiful that they all
I
life
will
is a
say,
stage
like,
and that kind of shit.
1, 2, and 5 all do some really great storytelling meta stuff, and we'll get into that with 5.
Okay.
But I definitely agree with you that there is a lot of thought put into how they space out scenes, how they space out, where we begin and where we end. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Scream movies that I think in general make them good storytelling learning movies. Because there is, I agree with you 100% that there's a lot of thought that goes into that stuff. And I would say that, once again, like, the only thing that ever really drags the story for me is when they get into the meta exposition stuff. When it's like out, like when it's just out there.
Yeah, that feels like it's the fan service, where it's like, oh, it's not a Scream movie unless somebody lists some rules.
Especially in 3.
Yeah.
3.
We can get into 3 now. So let's.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, before I did say I was going to drop some news about 2 that I found out.
Sure.
So before we get too far off, I had incorrectly, apparently, in my Haunted Home Theater talking about 2, talked about it was the first movie to ever have its ending leaked on the internet, and that they had to rewrite the ending and stuff like that because it got out there. Turns out Kevin Williamson, who is the creator and writer of 1 and 2, and we'll talk about a little bit 3, 4, 5, but 1 and 2 specifically, he's like the sole writer of, purposefully leaked fake endings. So the real ending never actually leaked. He specifically gave fake endings to a blog writer so that they would leak just in case the real one did leak. So it was a preemptive strike, which I did not know until a podcast interview this past week. Kind of disappointed, but I understand that. Like, I'm real. The veil is starting to be lifted from my eyes about film marketing and how long, not necessarily because like recent, like modern day shit with like Marvel movies, and they were like CGI erase certain characters from scenes and trailers and shit, that I 100% believe. Like, I know that shit happens on purpose, but then like they accidentally leaked footage or whatever from the new Spider-Man movie, and I'm like, yeah, accidentally. And and to be honest, like that makes sense modern day, but now I'm seeing that it's been going on for quite a while, that they've been pulling shit like that. So it kind of is disappointing to me. It's a little disheartening, but it is what it is. All right, so now 3. Do you know anything about the backstory of 3? Because I'm sure you'll be the first one to say 3 is a massive drop off from 1 and 2. It's not bad, but there's a big quality drop.
Yeah, it's also like a lot wackier than like 2.
Yep.
And 1.
Fucking Parker
Like
Posey.
2 and 1 have aspects in them that are very like tongue in cheek and like winky.
Yes.
But like 3
is goofy.
It's goofy. Like the fucking the fax machine scene when like the killer's like faxing.
Yep.
And then the house explodes. And I was at that point, like, I was just kind of rolling on the floor laughing because it was so
Scooby-Doo.
It was so over the top. It was just. I will give it this, which it was very unexpected, and I was entertained.
Okay.
But it felt very
not Scream.
It just felt distinctly different from the other Scream movies.
Well, a little bit of backstory. So they originally had a different script that was wholly written by Kevin Williamson, the original creator. And right before they were supposed to start filming, Columbine happened. Now, the original script had Stu, Matthew Lillard from the first movie, the guy who got the TV dropped on his head, surviving and orchestrating Ghostface killers from prison. He was like manipulating, brainwashing high school students to get to finish the job. And the Weinsteins looked at it and said, we can't film this. We can't have high school kids killing people. Not after Columbine. We have to scrap this.
Sure.
So they didn't want to do that. So they wanted a different script. But Kevin Williamson at that point was a hot commodity. he was like he had his fingers in. I think he's the creator of Dawson's Creek. He did the horror film The Faculty, killing Mrs. Tingle. What else was he doing at that time? He was doing a whole bunch of different things. But the point of the matter is he was so busy he could not write a whole script for it.
Yeah.
So, he like gave like a rough outline type thing of what he would do. And then they gave it to this other writer named Aaron Kruger, who kind of came in and wrote it and didn't want to write in Kevin Williamson's voice. And I think the Weinsteins probably didn't want it to be as sharp and cunning as 1 and 2, and they wanted to lighten it up a little bit more simply because of the Columbine and the violence and issues and stuff. I think they were succumbing to that pressure. So my biggest issue with the movie is I don't think the movies do that well when Sidney Prescott is not the focal point, Neve Campbell. And you'll notice that for the first half of Scream 3, that's where a lot of the engine is missing. But when Sidney shows up halfway through that movie at the police station, the movie fucking picks up. And all of a sudden it starts feeling like a Scream movie
I agree.
again. And
I agree a lot. And that is my favorite thing about 3 is thematically regarding Sydney's story.
Yes.
Because it does give her closure, going with what she went through 1 and 2. And
it makes sense where she starts out. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Her hiding in the woods, doing like remote work and shit like that, like she was living in COVID times or something. But that makes sense for her character to start there. But after Cotton gets killed, it should have been, Sydney's back. All right, we got to, you know what I mean? Like like how she was in 5, where it was like, no, I'm tackling this head on. Instead of, hiding until somebody gives her a phone call and then she's like, well, fuck it. That to me feels a little weak for her.
3 and 4 kind of merged together in my mind. Was Hicks introduced in 3 or 4?
4.
4. Okay. I'm having some issues remembering the timelines in that regard, because I think this is the other issue is in 3. I'm really not remembering the beginning of it, and I'm having a hard time remembering even who the killers were in 3 because.
Okay. Let me do a quick recap. So opening of 3 is Cotton Weary on the highway. And he's talking with his publicist about
That's right, because he's got the talk show now.
Right. And he's going to be in a cameo in the next Stab movie. And then the killer calls him with the magic voice changer that everybody hates, where Ghostface can steal other people's voices. And then he has to rush home and save his girlfriend. He doesn't, and him and the girlfriend end up biting it. Shortly thereafter, they're starting to investigate it. The guy from Grey's Anatomy, Mark Kincaid, is a detective from Hollywood. He's got his smartass, not Ben Stiller partner. And they're investigating. They're trying to, use Dewey and Gale to kind of get more information about what they can do. And then they slowly find out that the killer is killing people based on the new script and leaving notes at the kill scenes about killing Sydney's mom. And then they kill off Jenna McCarthy, or whatever her name is, Jim Carrey's ex-wife. Then shortly after that, the house blows up. That's like the centerpiece. And then Roman, the director of it, gets arrested because the phone call to Jenny McCarthy came from his phone, and he's very much a Billy Loomis, where he's like, no, it wasn't me. She wasn't talking to me. And they take him away. And then I think there's a phone call to Sydney where she has a nightmare. It's like really fucking confusing. And then she finally shows up. And then they start searching the set for some fucking reason. And then she gets attacked.
That's right, because she's having visions of her mom and stuff.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm remembering it all now. 3 was a hard one for me to focus on. Who was the other? Was there another killer in that one?
No.
Or was it just Roman?
It's just Roman. It's the only movie that doesn't have 2 killers.
Because that's the one with the reveal where it's like fucking Roman's like her long lost brother and all that shit.
Yes.
Yeah. That was like one of those things where I was just like, I don't know. Come on.
I mean,
really?
it works in the essence that, her mom was, a promiscuous woman, and
sure.
Giving away a baby isn't the most hard to believe thing, I guess. And I mean, they were I'm very, very sure that either Aaron Kruger, Kevin Williamson, or Wes Craven, or a combo of the three, were secretly trying to out Harvey Weinstein with this movie, just because of the whole producer who fucks chicks and takes advantage of women.
There's definitely an undertone about that.
Yeah,
sure.
Which I'm shocked that they let actually come out, because it came out through the Weinstein Company.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, that kind of concept works for me. I allow it because they, like how Randy says in his videotape rules about it going back to the original and tying everything together. It works. It works thematically. It works for a story thing. Realistically, but it's
right.
it's a story, so I allow it. In the original script, I believe Roman was the killer, and I think they also had Angelina, who was the woman that plays Sydney in the movie. She was supposed to be his accomplice, and then I guess they just axed that idea and just said, all right, just keep it as Roman. I actually enjoy the showdown between Sydney and Roman. Like, exposition beside about why he's doing it, motive and this and that. A little flimsy, but still better than 4 and 5, in my opinion. And I just like her response to it has absolutely changed from the way she talked to Billy and Stu or Mrs. Loomis and Mickey. Like, she just like, I've heard this shit before. Let's get on with this. Like, and to me, that really starts to show her growth, and it makes it all worth it in that final scene when the door blows open in the wind, and it's like, oh, we're gonna go watch a movie, and Sydney's just like, all right, and then just lets the door blow open. Like, to me, that's such a beautiful moment where it's like, yeah, she's gone from being this paranoid teenage girl who's suffered all this trauma and constantly being attacked by these crazy people that are trying to, like, make a name off of her death that they can try and do and this and that finally she feels like, okay, the dust is settled. This was all because of, my mother's history, and now it's over. Which is the downfall of the fucking franchise, in my opinion, because now the question becomes, well, what do you do with Sydney? Like, what story arc does she do? And the answer that they came up with, fucking nothing. Like, she's there.
And she just kind of shows up.
So we can talk about 4, and it's just like, unless you had any more thoughts that you wanted to jump out on 3, because I'm sure you have plenty.
I'll probably come back to them. 3 was one of those movies where I didn't hate it, but it was
mundane.
It was harder. Yeah, it was mundane. It was harder to get through. And some of the silliness, like, both detracted and added, I think, for myself, just because the overall plot wasn't grabbing me all that much. So, like, all the silly stuff that happened sort of ended up being like distractions that kind of keep me going through the movie. Because there was a point where I was like, okay, where's this going to go? Like, how much more ridiculous is it going to get? But I mean, the house blowing up fax machine scene was probably the apex of that.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit excessive. All right, so 4. When I saw this movie in 2011, now you got to remember, I was a fucking mark for the Scream series by this point. There was no going back for me. So when 4 was announced, I was that crazy kid. Couldn't wait to see it. Dying opening night. Went to the first showing on a Thursday preview. Me and my little sister, and I'm pretty sure it was maybe 5 other people in the theater. It was terrible. There was nobody going to see this movie.
Oh, no.
I'm watching this movie and the opening scene. Now, the opening scene, when you talked about 2 being too meta, the opening scene of 4 is what I would describe as too meta. It's funny if you're goofing around shooting ideas in the writer's room, where you're like, let's have a scene within a scene within a scene within a scene, and the audience won't know when the real movie started and when we're still fucking with them. And that's kind of that's like a Funny or Die sketch where you could just do that, and it's like, okay, that's fun. To me, you hold up the opening scene of 4 against the opening scenes of 1, 2, or 3, and you're like, wait a minute. It's not supposed to be gimmicky, meta, funny. It's supposed to be threatening. It's supposed to be severe.
Yeah, it really doesn't match the tone of the rest of the movie either.
Right.
It feels like if the rest of the movie were as, like, wacky and gimmicky as that opening, I think that I could argue in favor. But the way that it's treated in the rest of the movie, and it's not to say that the rest of the movie doesn't have its tongue-in-cheek moments, it does.
Sure.
But it's not to that level. It's such a jump the shark moment that it really does mess up the rest of the rhythm of the movie after.
Yeah. And if you pay attention during that opening scene too, they highly re-edited it. It was not the way after the fake movies end and you get into the quote unquote real scene, it's really clunky. And there's even a scene, like if you go back and you watch it, I don't know if you still have the opportunity to, but you should go back and watch the opening scene. There's a scene where I guess not the blonde, but the kind of brunette chick that dies second. She's upstairs and she's taunting her friend downstairs on her phone, pretending like she's Ghostface. And there's this weird edit where she's upstairs in like broad daylight, not broad daylight, but like all the lights in the house are on. And then she walks down the stairs and suddenly all of the house lights are off, but we don't see the house lights go off on camera. Like it's just like an edit and she doesn't react to it or anything like that because they went back and did reshoots because I guess they weren't happy with the original cut of it, which was supposedly so violent that it was like an NC-17 movie, which to me was like, fuck, I want to see that. Like I wonder if that was the severe way that it would have really felt like 1, 2, 3, 4, like it would have fit within the franchise. But I've yet to find it. I find like stills and like deleted scenes that kind of reference it, but you can't fill in all the parts. So it's really difficult to know what happened there. And then from there, I remember the opening credit, like, you know, it slashes the screen, says Scream 4 and da-da-da-da. And I remember sitting in the theater with like 8 other people around me thinking to myself, this feels off. Something's not, like this does not feel like a Scream movie to me. And then I'm watching it, I'm going, this cinematography, is this all out of focus? Like, I don't know what's happening here. Like, this is really shitty camera work. Why is everything look so muted, desaturated, and kind of out of focus and blurry? And then I'm listening, I'm like, the score sounds like a fucking MIDI soundtrack, like not like an 8-bit video game. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Like it used to sound like a Western, you know what I mean? Like with like a plucky guitar and like those low minor chords. And I'm thinking to myself, something's not right here. I don't know what's going on. Come to find out recently, in that same interview, I found out where Kevin Williamson leaked the ending on purpose. There were 8 writers on this movie. And he's the only credited one, I believe. But so there's like 7 other ghostwriters. And I'm thinking to myself, that fucking makes sense now because so much of this movie feels like movie by committee. And you know what I mean? Like where it's like, oh, we need to have this scene. We need to have that scene. We need to have this scene. Oh, let's do a scene like this and da-da-da. And there was no real plan to actually make a good movie. It was just kind of it was a cash grab. Now, don't get me wrong. There's things about this movie that I do enjoy. I do enjoy Hayden Panettiere as Kirby, which is the female Randy. I think
she's a good character.
She is a redeeming character for this movie. Especially, and I would say the one moment that it felt like a real Scream movie was her phone call in the end. When she's being quizzed by the killer and she's renting off all the remakes and stuff and she's highly emotional and you know what I mean? Like to me, that felt like the opening scene in the first Scream movie. And I was like, okay, maybe that's why the opening scene was goofy because that way they could contrast it with this moment. Like we were maybe trying to, like the thought process that I tried to justify it with, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I tried to justify it as franchise thematically, we went like downhill. And the opening movie was trying to transition from the tone of 3, the goofiness of 3, back into the severity of 1 and 2.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there, and that makes sense because wasn't 4 also like it was made a bit later too, right?
Yes. So 3, I believe, came out in 99. The first 2 was 96, 97, and then there was like a down period where I think it didn't happen. It was either 99, 2001, or 2003. There was a big...
Yeah, because they make reference to it. They kind of make reference to it in 4 where they're talking about like all these other like series like Final Destination and Saw and all this other stuff to sort of poke fun at the fact that, like, oh, we're coming back after all these other movies have been doing all this, you know, their own versions of horror shit.
Yeah.
Once again, I mean, 4 is another movie where the themes were very interesting.
Sure.
I actually think the motivation for the killer was pretty strong in 4. And I will give it that.
So we talked about this last week where I said that people loved 4 and they were saying how great 4 is and how misunderstood 4 was. And I said, I know exactly the argument people make about 4 being so great, and I know exactly why they're wrong. Because while the motivation of that whole, I need likes, I need followers, I need fans, being the main motivation for the killer, was ahead of its time, 100%, because it was just starting to become that way in 2011 when this movie came out. That doesn't redeem the rest of the movie having poor filmmaking. That's my argument with it. Like, you can have your issues with the motive for Mickey at the end of 2, but as a whole, 2 is still cinematically and story-wise pretty tight, pretty creative, pretty innovative. Like, all of those things are checked off. So if you have like a minute, like a little, it's almost like you could say Scream 1 was an A+, and Scream 2 was like an A or an A-. This is like Scream 4 to me feels like a D+, where it's like, okay, I'll give you the plus because her motive is kind of ahead of the time, and I could see someone being that unhinged. But this is where the downslide starts to happen for me, and I'm going to explain it, and it's my one and only issue with 5 as well. The motive is not directly tied to a personal issue with Sidney Prescott.
Yeah.
One,
that makes sense.
Billy's upset because her mom broke up their family. 2, Mrs. Loomis is upset because Sidney killed her son. 3, Roman's upset because Sidney took the mother that he never had. All of the killers, even when, so like Stu, you could feel was an actual, like a crazy person and just, you know, tagged along for the ride. Same thing with Mickey. You could say, so you have those weak kind of cinematic, goofy movie motive, like Scooby-Doo type shit. And then you have the more severe personal motive, which I think really is what makes it feel authentic, where it's like, okay, this person is setting up that person as their patsy so they can get away with it. And they want to take out Sidney because of this personal reason. With 4, that doesn't happen at all. We lose that. There's not even like some kind of, like, even though Sidney's related to her, we don't get a personal kind of vendetta against Sidney. And that to me is where it starts feeling weak. And that's why, to me, overall, 4 sucks horribly because the filmmaking isn't on par. We're missing that personal motive. It doesn't feel as severe. And let's not be honest, while interesting to watch, the idea of someone stabbing themselves and throwing themselves through a coffee table and all this kind of shit is just as wacky as the house blowing up and shit in 3.
It is wacky. I will say that those are pretty good scenes, though, in terms
They're interesting. I'm not disputing that. But in terms of severity of what's going on, it just makes me go, oh, I don't feel like someone's going to die here.
The end of the movie... Scream movies always have a pretty consistently strong third act.
Yeah.
3 is a little weaker. 4 is kind of weak until that scene. That scene was really good. And, you know, like go afterwards when they go to the hospital.
That feels tacked on.
It drags on.
Yeah.
It definitely drags on. And I feel like that's how I would describe 4 in general, is it just drags on.
Yeah.
Like it never quite gets to a point where you have a lot of momentum to go with. It tries to establish all this stuff.
I think the problem with 4 was they did not do something that they did in 5, which was kill one of the legacy people. I feel like that would have once again, and that supports my argument for Scream 2 killing Randy, is that I mean, I can understand it after 2 where you kill Randy, then you have everybody survive in 3 because then it's unexpected. You're like, oh, which one of them's going to bite it this time? Oh, all 3 made it out. Yay. You know what I mean? Like you play with those expectations and that's how you do that. But then by 4, somebody or everybody's got to fucking go and they don't. And that it makes it weaker for me. And
yeah, especially by 4, it's like almost the entire cast is just like totally new people who have no real other than one person, have any real relation to the legacy characters. So it almost feels like we're just gonna overlay Scream on some other like cookie cutter slasher movie.
Yeah.
And that to me, and you feel it early on. You feel it pretty much from the word go. And so for me, I was just like, oh, okay, well, we'll see how this goes.
Yep, and that's why I don't watch 4 nearly as often as I do the other. I watch 1 and 2 almost every month. It's very rare that I'll go a month without putting on 1 or 2, just even as background noise. 3, I will watch when I'm in the mood. It's got to be a very specific mood for me to put on. Like, this is like, oh, I want to put on a Scream movie and make sure I don't get distracted while it's on. Like I can work on other things and not get distracted by it. 3 is that movie. 4 is I need a movie to fall asleep to, but I want to watch a Scream movie. So
well, that's what happened to me. Is like there were a couple times where I almost fell asleep during that movie. And that's I think what's so frustrating about how good the motivation or how interesting the motivation and premise is for the killer in that movie is it feels totally wasted on that movie. And so I can see why people feel very like appreciative of it, but it should have been in a much better movie. It should have been in a movie that could actually handle that idea more appropriately, because they don't really do that much with the social media stuff in that movie. You have little hints of it. The geek character who's got like the headset with him all the time.
Yeah.
But you never really get any massive sense of how much social media is starting to envelop the world. I mean, you see people on their smartphones and stuff, but I think that makes more sense I think that reads better to us now than it might have been for people in the theaters then. I could be totally wrong about that. It might have been the exact same thing for them.
It's an interesting killing premise, like for a motive, but they don't do anything with it throughout the movie. And this is going to come up to, so when we wrap up this, I wanted to kind of go back to our normal format where we're talking about storytelling techniques and artistry and this and that. So I wanted to wait until we were closing, but here's the thing about it. And like, this is part of the problem with the motive for 4. It's great. I buy it, but you didn't do anything with it during the rest of the movie. Like you didn't have, like if you had the killer uploading the kills one by one to their YouTube page and the other characters watching it, and do you know what I mean? People trying to trace IP addresses and this and that.
They had so many ways to set that up too. And you could have had the geek character as a red herring, and they just didn't really do anything with that.
Yeah, there are no real red herrings except for Deputy Judy when she has that creepy scene in the stairwell at the house with Sydney.
That was it.
And okay,
you figure out pretty quick it's not her. So
we need to talk about Anthony Anderson. I need to talk about Anthony Anderson because I don't give a fuck how realistic it is, in fact, that this can happen. If you get stabbed in the head in a movie, you are dead instantly. I don't give a fuck if your brain still functions for 10 minutes in real life, or your motor skills still work and you can still walk around like a chicken with its head cut off. I don't give a fuck. It's just unbelievable in a movie that has had a series of other movies where people get stabbed in the stomach once and are dead forever. If you get stabbed in the head and then you stumble 12 paces and shout out a one-liner right before you collapse and die, I fucking groan. I cringe. I die a little inside because that was the movie. That was the moment during my first screening of the movie where I was like, oh, fuck this movie. Like, I'm not here to watch this. Like, this is joke. This is not Scream. There's no severity to the kills. That was one of the beauty of the other movies, 1, 2, 3, was that in the moments where the killer was attacking someone, it was serious. We're not playing for laughs right now. It's not a comedy. There's not really that much meta-ness going on. This is a serious situation. In between those serious situations, you have characters making smart-ass remarks and being assholes and, you know, being terrible people and joking about things. That's where the comedy is drizzled in to kind of dip in and out of different emotions. So that way it's a roller coaster ride. It's enjoyable. It's, you know what I mean? When you start making jokes during kill scenes, you're ruining it. You're blending the water and the oil, and it's just like watered down oil. It doesn't taste good. That's not what I want. And
yeah, that makes sense.
For him to do that, like that kind of stuff started bothering me. Same thing with Robbie, the headset guy gets killed. He's like, "Oh, I'm gay." What? Like, I realize that's part of the rules that they're talking about, but like, in this moment, this is not the time for that. This is not. You're undercutting the severity of what's going on. And again, that great motive of Jill's does not redeem all of this poor filmmaking that's going on.
I don't feel like it does. I mean, I will be hard pressed to revisit Scream 4 for sure.
It became kind of like a situation for me where I hated it for so long that after like a couple of years, like I didn't buy the DVD. I have every Scream movie poster on my wall. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, and 5. I do not have any posters from Scream 4. That's how much I was so against it. And at some point in the years that followed of me railing against this movie, it was almost like Stockholm Syndrome, where I was like, I need to watch it again. I want to watch this again. Maybe I was wrong. Like, because I heard people like, oh, it's so great. And I'm like, maybe I was in the wrong mood or something. Like, and I watched it again and I'm like, nope, still sucks. Can't get behind it. And I don't know. I don't understand why people do. I mean, I think there's definitely a nostalgia factor that gets into some of these movies where people rank 4 above 1. And I'm like, that was the first Scream movie you saw, wasn't it? Like, and it's pretty clear that they're either hanging on Jill's motive as the best thing that redeems the entire movie. And it doesn't for me. Maybe it does for them. I can't speak for other people. Or it was the first Scream movie they saw. And that's the only two ways that I can explain people liking this movie above 1 or 2. You could argue 3. I could see people saying 3 because it's got a little bit more of a darker tone. It's not as goofy. But I can't see putting this movie above 5 or 1 and 2. I really can't.
Yeah.
I really can't. That said, if you don't have anything else to talk about with 4, we can move on to 5.
I'm done with 4.
Okay. 5. All right, I just realized this a few hours before we came on to record. I called some shit about this a year before the movie was even shot. In November something or whatever, 2020. So the movie got filmed in like August through October 2021, and then it came out just now in 2022, January. In November of 2020, so a year and a half ago, I listed 3 different things in a Twitter post about what they could do to subvert expectations for Scream 5. And the 3 things that I listed were, number 1, you don't kill Sydney off in the opening sequence or the end. You kill her second. Like, you make her the second person attacked and then she's dead. Like, you wouldn't see that. Like, that would violate structural rules. And that, to me, would be surprising. Number 2, you could pull off the mask or reveal who the Ghostface people are 60 minutes into the movie and not do a big reveal during the third act. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, oh shit, so-and-so was Ghostface 60 minutes in. And then you have to like, oh, is there more killers? Or was this the only one? Or what was the like, you could do a whole bunch of stuff halfway through the movie. Be like, oh shit, we're figuring out who the killer is now. That's surprising. Or even in the opening sequence. But that's not what I listed. The third thing that I listed was the one that actually came true. The opening sequence kill did not get killed. Yeah. She survives. And I fucking called it. I was like, that's it. That's exactly one of the things that you do to subvert, because that's what every Scream movie has, the opening kill. Well, what if we have this fucking chick get a phone call? She gets stabbed. She gets stomped. She gets, like, viciously stabbed. Yep. And then, oh no, she lived. Like, that's a way you throw people off right from the start.
In general, it seems like everybody in Scream 5 got more health points.
Yes.
Like people get fucking brutalized in that movie.
It's true.
Just make it. I'm like, what?
People are a lot fucking
Medicine
tougher.
Hasn't gotten that much better over the course of the last 20 years.
But see, and here's the difference between Tara, the girl getting attacked in the opening of Scream 5, and Anthony Anderson getting stabbed in the head in Scream 4, is that she's not making her Babadook joke right at the end of the opening scene.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not the time for her to make that comment. She's just been brutally
Yeah.
stabbed several times. She's got her ankle like crushed and like all this kind of crazy shit. That's not the moment for that comedy. It's just not. And I buy the fact that she got stabbed and somehow she was able to survive and this and that because they didn't undercut it with stupid ass comedy.
For sure. And I would say in general, Scream 5 is way more particular about how it uses comedic elements. It felt like a very tense movie throughout.
Back to the vibes of 1 and 2.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it does have to do with just like how judiciously comedy is used in it. The meta, for the most part, is like reined back a little bit enough so that it isn't just like in your face all the time.
Yeah.
I will say, like, there are some pacing issues where there's one particular scene where they go to they go to the room that's like the big memorial room for Randy and all that stuff, and they're talking about the roles. That scene was a little bit hard to get through because it was just so like it felt long. Like they were just trying to talk about all the roles. I was like, okay, all right, we'll go through this because we have to.
Yeah.
There are certain things you have to go through if you watch a Scream movie. And some things I look forward to and other things I don't look forward to. And the roles are the ones that I usually don't look forward to. It is funny, like every Scream movie has a scene where like Ghostface gets kicked in the face. I thought that was like an interesting convention to carry through from movie to movie. Like, it seems like there's a checklist of things you have to do in the movie, and that's like one on the checklist. I wish I would have kept the checklist because there are a couple other things I can't remember at the moment. But
it's nice that in this movie, not all of them, but some of them are acknowledged and made fun of. Like it starts making fun of not the movie, but it makes fun of the franchise itself. Like I like at the end of the movie when Sydney's finally going into the house and she gets the phone call after they shot Amber on the front porch. And she's like, "Oh, are you okay? We shot you." And he's like, "No, I'm the other one." "Oh, there's two of you. How original." Like to me, that's the type of shit that I was showing up for, where it's like, okay, that's what I want to see in a reboot or a requel or whatever the hell they were calling it, where it's like, okay, we're tackling this subject in terms of how fucking stupid it is and how these characters are just like, I don't give a fuck anymore about these rules.
Something I thought was also interesting in Scream 5 was they weren't just meta about that movie. They were meta about another movie, which was, so the character of Amber, her actor, the actor, she plays
I knew
one
you were
of the
going to bring this
murderers.
up.
Yeah, because it's like one of my favorite movies of all time. So as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, that's one of the killers. She got typecast.
Sure.
But her character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood gets caught on fire and like runs around screaming, and she does the exact same thing in Scream 5 in her death scene.
Yep.
And I thought that was a really interesting call out because to me it seemed like an acknowledgement from the direction team of like, yeah, this is what we're doing. Like, and it was a surprise.
You know what's funny? A couple weeks before the movie came out, they were doing press for 5, right? And I of course was gobbling it up like the little bitch that I am for these movies. And I'm watching and I'm half paying attention, right? I'm not paying full attention. I'm like on my phone, but I've got it in the background because most of the time when the actors give these interviews, they give the same answers. So like I've watched a couple of interviews already and they're already, retelling the same stories and this and that. And I'm not paying attention. And the interviewer, the newsman, asks her about what you're talking about, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, about her being set on fire and what it was like to have that experience and to have a stunt woman and da-da-da-da. Me not paying attention to him ask that question, but knowing from the trailers that a character got set on fire and this and that, looks up and goes, "What the fuck? Why would you just spoil that? Why would you ask a question about her being set on fire?" So then I go back and I'm like, oh, he's talking about some other movie. Oh, okay, never mind. But then I'm thinking about it a couple of days later and I'm like, why would he ask her that question during a Scream press junket? Fuck. And then I realized I'm like, it's going to be her. So either she's dying that way or whatever. So when it got to that point, I was like, this motherfucker ruined it. And I don't know about you, but I called both killers in this movie about halfway through.
I'm trying to. I can't. I'm kind of blanking on who the other killer was.
The boyfriend.
Right. Okay.
Dennis Quaid's son.
Yeah.
The moment that, and R.I.P. The moment, again, we warned you for spoilers. The moment Dewey was attacked in the hospital, and the boyfriend is right there. He's right next to it as it's happening. And I'm like, get up and help Dewey. What are you fucking doing? Get up and help Dewey. Get up and help Dewey. The moment he didn't do that and Dewey died, I was like, oh, he's a killer. There's no way he was. It wasn't like he was always knocked out. No, he was fucking laying there. He just got knocked down.
Yeah.
And it became apparently. So I'm like, okay, he's one of the killers. And then I was just looking at the girl and I was like, yeah, she looks like a killer. Like I've figured this shit out. Like I've seen enough of these movies enough times that I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be her. So when she shot the girl with the pink hair, I was like, oh yeah, there we go.
I do think that speaks to the strength of Scream 5 as a story, though, that it can withstand even those particular.
Yeah.
I don't know if they call them flaws, but I mean, it's a little bit of a flaw that you can kind of call out who the killers are pretty early on. And I didn't call out I didn't really. I spent a long while not thinking that it was going to be the boyfriend who was going to be the other killer. But I remember when Amber showed, I was like, yeah, she's got killer vibes. Like,
but they do. You know what? Here's what the thing is, and I don't. I'm very curious to know your opinion about the whole Rian Johnson references. They talk about like the Mary Sue thing about like female characters who can do anything and this and that. Maybe I am a male chauvinist, but I'm watching this in retrospect because I went twice. I want to go again, but the second time I went, it's clear that it's Amber that kills Dewey, and I'm looking at this going, this fucking 4'8", 68-pound girl kills Dewey,
right?
Really? Like. I'll take a lot of really weird shit, like Mrs. Loomis killed Sarah Michelle Gellar, like Aunt Jackie killed Buffy, or you know what I mean? Like I'll swallow that. I guess I can take that. But this little high school bitch killed Dewey.
That's something in general throughout all the Scream movies. Kind of is always sitting in the back of my head because you see the Ghostface killer do kind of incredible physical feats, you know?
Yeah.
Something that's more impressive than just like a regular ass person would do. And there are characters for which that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I could totally see Billy Loomis doing that. I could see both Billy and Stu doing that.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. Like you're saying with Billy's mom, not so sure, you know?
She caught Randy off guard, so I will give her that.
Yeah.
Mickey was pretty built. You know, Oliphant was in shape for that, so I'll buy it. I could see Scott Foley, who played Roman in 3, I could see him having some ability. I do not see fucking Emma Roberts having a strength to kill like Anthony Anderson and Adrian Brody. You know what I mean? Like I could see her.
That's an interesting thing is she had. I don't know. She had such psycho vibes. It was kind of viable.
That's that second gear that crazy people can have, like that extra like adrenaline strength. I'll give it that. The Charlie character, the Culkin, I don't buy it from him as much.
Really.
I would take her as the stronger of the two. And then in this movie, little Amber, and then fucking, I don't know if I buy Richie as having that strength either.
Neither of them are very viable in terms of physical feat.
No. Yeah.
But once again, it kind of goes to the strength of the story overall, where it's not that big of a deal. It's very much something that I'll swallow that pill anyway from the get-go. I came into a Scream movie with these expectations.
But I mean, and like you said, it's an attribute to the movie because, like how we said with 4, Emma Roberts' motive does not redeem the poor qualities of the rest of the movie. In this movie, the poor motive does not negate the strength of the rest of this movie, where you know what I mean, where they were doing certain things. So even though I have that nitpick, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, there were several.
I still
things
highly enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was like, yeah, Dewey's gonna die. Like he had those Han Solo vibes. Where I was just like, yeah, that's what's gonna happen.
Yep.
Like it's coming up.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly what scene it was because he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go kill the killer," and then he gets killed.
Yeah. There was no way he was walking out of that situation.
But I will say, like, much stronger, very strong cast.
The young cast was so much more defined.
Yes.
They all had persona, character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to my favorite thing in this movie, which is, the big reveal, right? Which is that, shit, I can't remember the character's name, but, like, she's Billy Loomis's daughter, right?
Sam.
And they use that to full effect. And I was so impressed by how they used that character. Like, by the end of the movie, I was like, oh, I'm actually kind of interested to see if they do anything with this character in another movie. Because that is a good enough of a hook that you can, no pun intended, that's a good enough of a hook that you can follow that up. You know?
Because everybody was, and going into this movie, everybody was like, oh, is Sydney going to be the killer this time? And I was like, if they fucking do that, I will burn the theater down. Because that just it completely negates her entire arc as a character, and it undermines the storytelling. Same thing with Dewey and Gale. You don't do that. Like, it doesn't make sense. But if I'm watching Scream 6, part of me starts to wonder, Sam's already got psychotic visions, and now she's had a taste of killing people. Like, could this character go off the deep end? Yeah, actually, she fucking could. And to me, that is a very interesting arc to play with. Like, I could see that. Like, it's one that I want to watch too.
Yeah. No, like the whole like using your crazy as a strength thing was used so well in this movie. Like, I was kind of stunned by it, because at first I was like, this feels like such a gimmick. And then as the movie went on, I was like, oh, they're actually like really using this to, like, they're using every piece of this animal and letting it play out. Because by the end, one of my favorite things that this movie does is at the very end, they like book in the way that the killer is killed, because all the other movies, it's like shot in the head. Yeah. In this movie, stabbed to death. And it's a great way of subverting those expectations, but also it's a great way of using that aspect of her character, because by the end you're like, okay, like there's a serial killer coming out, right? There's that part of her past coming out, and what I would hope, if the writing team is adept enough, we'll use that in the next movie in a way that is really intriguing, right? Like you were kind of talking about, where it's becomes her internal struggle. Yeah, if they do it right, we'll see.
And that's the thing. That's why I posted this on Twitter. This is why I was most looking forward to discussing this with you versus generic Twitter, because the regular fandom and general audiences and stuff like that, right now, their whole hype is, we need to bring back Matthew Lillard as Stu. He needs to be a mastermind in the next movie. So basically taking the thrown out script of 3 that got shelved because of Columbine and reworking that and bringing him back as a killer in 6. And to me, not interested. I'm
not interested at all. I have no, like, this is the thing that's really interesting about 5, is it made this mechanism by which we don't even have to care about the previous movies as much.
Yeah. Or this movie as a quote unquote 2-hour trailer for the next movie. It's not that. It's its own thing. And that's what I enjoy about it.
We've now consolidated all the previous movies into one character.
Yes.
And so you can just forget about previous Screams. Not that you are, but I mean, like, you don't have to have that there anymore.
It literally is the passing of the torch.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And they used Sydney in a better way in this movie than they did in 4. So 4, she's just there because of the familial ties, where it's like, oh, she has to be there because of her book tour, and she could be a suspect, and her car is a crime scene. You could line up 20 different reasons why Sydney has to stay there. None of them are emotionally, thematically, cinematically compelling. It does not make me give a shit. This movie is what I wanted her to do in the opening of 3, where it's like, no, shit's going down. I need to be there to help because no one knows this shit better than me. And like she said, I got babies. I'm not sleeping till this motherfucker's dead. And to me, that kind of stuff is really compelling for her character. So while she's not in this movie, she's in this movie about as much as she is in 3. And to me, this movie as a whole is better than 3 because I gave a shit about the other characters before any of the legacy people showed up. Any of them. It was that interesting. And then,
well, and also I think a big part of that made it work like that was the character of Tara, because it creates this huge tension of like, you've got this person who's like injured and weak and can't really take care of themselves that well, and so now you have a huge motivation for Sam, and it really does drive that movie the whole time. I have to say, like, that movie. I think that movie kind of set the mark for how to do remakes and reboots if people do them anymore. Yeah, a requel. Because, like, it did it right. Like, it did it in a way that respected the older movies, but also was like, but here's something new. Yeah. Here's something you did not expect to see, and we want to open up new venues within this story.
And you know what I really loved? Someone pointed this out on, I think it was Facebook or Twitter, or maybe even Instagram. I don't remember. The idea of a character having a psychotic vision or hallucination of somebody is not one that's really been explored in the Scream movies. They've been relatively grounded in reality, with the exception of the movie within a movie and Sydney's dream sequence of her dead mom in 3. Yeah. Which a dream sequence is a dream sequence. You can't really knock that too much. The movies within a movies, that's the meta bullshit that they like to, that's what they dress the story in. And I get it. It's the aesthetic that gets asses in seats, and it's the gimmick, whatever. But in Scream 1, Billy's talking to Sydney right before they have sex, and he references Silence of the Lambs, and he goes kind of like Jodie Foster's character in Silence of the Lambs, where she keeps having visions of her dead father. And then I'm thinking, and then someone points out, well, guess what happens in this new Scream movie? The girl has visions of her dead father. And it's like, oh, that's another fucking call. Like, this is fucking good. Because I didn't think about it while I'm watching the movie. And I can tell you, I've watched the first Scream movie 1,000,000 times, and that never occurred to me while watching it. And that's really good, subtle storytelling where you inject that meta into it, where it doesn't pull you out from the movie. And so it added that layer to it, and it made it more enjoyable. So I'm very excited to watch this movie again. I've seen it twice. When I walked out the first time, I was like, that was good. I don't need to see it again. And then I waited a day, and then I went and saw it again, and I was like, all right, I did like it. Like, I wasn't entirely sure the first time. Because you know what I mean? Like, if you go into a Scream movie, you know what you're getting. And in this movie, you didn't get all of that in the way you expected. It subverted expectations. And this was a situation where I was like, yeah, it subverted it, and I like it. Like, it didn't rub me the wrong way. I can enjoy this. And to me, the beautiful thing about this movie, I don't know how you do this, and this is where my hat really comes off to the filmmakers. I talked about the ending of 3, where you get closure for Sydney, and she leaves the door open, and she walks away, and the breeze blows, and then you just cut to black and credits, and it's over. And it's like, yeah, she made it out of this. She's happy. And then fucking 4 happens, and there's no real kind of, looking at her as an arc or anything like that. And then you come to this movie, and it's not her as the main character, but she's definitely playing the mentor character, right? And there's that scene at the very end of the movie where Sam comes up to her and Gail, and she goes, am I going to be okay? And Sydney goes, eventually. And you realize in that moment, Sydney was never going to be the main character of this movie. She's the mentor. She's the Obi-Wan. And for her to say eventually brought me to tears when I watched it, because I was like, oh, this is solidifying that Sydney has made it out. She's okay. And you know what I mean? Like, and she's giving that reassurance to someone else. So it's not like they opened up the wound. It's like, oh, she's not okay because this shit's happening again. No, she's okay. And in that moment, when she said eventually, I realized in that moment, I was like, they don't have to kill Sydney off. I don't need her in the next movie. I know she's okay. And that's all that I needed to know that everything was fine with her. And that's closure again. And that's beautiful. As a writer myself, I would not have been able to come up with that. That to me was just something that totally caught me off guard, that you could give a character closure twice and make it work. And to me, and it was just like, it took me to school. Like, now I'm thinking about ways that I would do that with a character. I'm like, how would I fucking, figure out a different way to provide closure? And it's just beautiful to me. It really was.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, the only reason 5 isn't my favorite Scream movie is because you can't watch it without having watched everything else before it.
Yeah.
It's, to me, like, it would be hard for me to imagine somebody watching Scream 5 without having ever watched anything else, because it's going to be largely unwatchable, or at least, like, the story's just not going to hit in the same way.
It's that weird conundrum where, like, I'm questioning when I show my son Star Wars movies. Do I show him 4, 5, 6 and then 1, 2, 3, or do I show him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Like, do I go? It's really that question of how are they going to perceive this differently? Will they be able to? Will it be worse? Will it be better? Will it be the same? Will it? I can't predict how that viewership will be affected by the order in which I arrange it, and that to me is very interesting. But it's hard because, like I talked about before, that nostalgia factor. Whichever the first thing that you saw, that usually jumps to you as quote unquote the best one because it sets your expectation level. So if you watched this one, right, and say you really enjoyed it, and then you went back and you watched the 96 Scream, you'd be like, oh, this isn't that good. There's 2 killers. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it ruins the original things in that way. But if you watch them in order, it escalates it where it's like, oh no, this is a step in the next direction. And to me, it's very interesting, that kind of thought process about how an order of viewing can affect the viewer's enjoyment of movies. For sure.
There is one other thing in Scream 5 that I've been thinking about since I watched it, because it bothered me, and that kind of frustrated me with Hicks's death, which was that, like, she's a cop, she was off duty, but, like, she didn't have a gun in her car. She knew, like, there was an issue. Like,
she was in her police car too, right?
I think she was.
I think she
that's
was
right,
too.
because she flipped on the signal. Yeah, or the siren, whatever you want to call it.
You would think there's a glove in the gun in the glove box or something like that.
Exactly. It seems to me like she would have been ready for that, because, like, the first thing I remember from her in 4 is, like, when they're in the bookstore and somebody's like, "Oh, we found the phone from the killer," and, like, all the other cops exit, they don't pull out their guns. She pulls out a gun, and it's kind of silly looking too. I remember laughing seeing it because I'm like, "Oh, Hicks, what the hell is she doing?" So, like, I was like, well, I felt like she would have had a gun, and So I've thought about this because I know that there's another reason for this, right? If she pulls out a gun in that scene, it would have to go off. Her son's in the shower upstairs. He would have heard the gun. So it's difficult to set up how he's going to die, right? Mm-hmm. Because...
Or if he even would, because I was watching that scene going, I don't know what's going to fucking happen here. Can I cut you off really quick? Just in the midst of talking about that scene. We were in a theater. And it was a relatively packed theater. Not full, like not sold out, but pretty well packed.
Yeah.
And this is when I knew that this audience was wasted on this movie. Wes is walking around this house, and he's opening doors and cabinets left and right. And every fucking time the music swells, like, because you know that horror movie trope, someone opens something, when they close it, someone's standing either in the mirror or behind that door or whatever like that. He goes around this house, he opens, I shit you not, at least 3 or 4 cabinet doors or whatever like that, and nothing fucking happens. And by the 3rd time, I was fucking rolling. I was laughing out loud hysterically. Nobody else in the theater thought it was funny but me. It was fucking wasted on this audience, because that's the meta that I'm there for, where it's like, this scene is being played serious, but if you know this scene from other horror movies, it's fucking hilarious. And that's what I loved about it. But go ahead. You were talking about Wes going through the house and
no, that's all I really had to say is, like, I think it's one of those things where the character and the situation wouldn't have matched up. Yeah. Because, like I said, like, if he had heard the gun go off, he probably wouldn't have gotten killed, or he would have done something. You know what I mean? Like,
or neighbors would have. The fact that she gets murdered in broad daylight in the middle of a suburban area was kind of crazy to me. But I bought it because I've been in the middle of a neighborhood in the middle of the day You know what I mean? And like, there's nobody fucking around. So I get it.
It didn't bother me that Hicks got killed. It bothered me that the way she got killed did not match her character.
Yes,
and that was my only issue with that.
Yeah, she absolutely should have had a gun. You're right. There should have been some kind of way that they should have written the gun out. Like, even if like the killer had planned to kill her and like she checked her glove box and was like, "Where the fuck is my gun?" That alone would have been enough for me to go, okay, the killer's one step ahead here, and that's why, you know, she didn't have the gun in that scene. But they don't have that stuff. So
but that's my only actual. I mean, other than that, and like some of the meta stuff, those are my only real complaints about the movie.
Fair enough.
They're not that big.
Yeah. So all right. So now I talked about this before, so we're gonna wrap up. We're way over our normal time limit, but I fucking love it. Talking about for the artistry and storytelling aspect of this, what to you, from someone who's just watched these movies like for the first time in a binge in like a week and a half, what to you is the storytelling component that really solidifies or what's the word, authenticates a good mystery? Do you know what I mean? Like, what do these movies do right in terms of constructing a mystery for a storytelling proponent? What jumps out at you as the way that it works, that a writer or a storyteller or an artist can take away from these movies?
There's a lot done in the subtlety of the acting and the way that some scenes are shot, especially like 1, 2, 5. I'll give 3 some benefit of the doubt. But there's so much done to really make you think like, oh, it really could be any of these people in this situation. Like they oftentimes wind down how many people could not be the killer to almost like 1 or 2, maybe at best in most movies. I mean, usually 3 after a certain point, once you're like,
well, in this movie, okay, I was even at the end when I knew who the 2 killers were before they revealed themselves, I was still questioning the little sister.
Sure.
Even though she got fucked up in the opening sequence and she got chased in the hospital, part of me has Billy Loomis trauma where I'm like, I don't know.
Right. That is something that really lends a lot to the tension in these movies. And it's hard for me to describe like the techniques used, because I think there are some really sophisticated techniques used to give off vibes for different characters where nothing's like vocally said. But visually, you pick up things where you go, oh, I don't know about this person.
They
like,
cut back to somebody just reacting and the way they react is a little like, well, why is he staring at her that long? And it allows you to kind of fill in that blank yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like that technique of letting the audience's imagination do the work for you, where they start to, make up their own narratives in their head. And then you eventually, pull the rug from under them and go, here's where you might have been wrong. And fairly frequently, like, I've been wrong in those movies, and those movies do a really good job of that. And, outside of the mystery aspects, I would say another really strong storytelling thing that these Scream movies have, even to the ones that I don't like that much, is like consistency. Like that movie franchise, I feel like more than most, has such a good consistency of characters. Like Sydney feel like, when you see her transition from movie to movie to movie, all of them feel believable. Nothing feels like out of the blue or anything. Same with Dewey, same with Gal. Like the writers always make sure that those characters feel like they're grounded within this world. Yeah. And I would argue that that's the case for most, if not all, of the components within all of these movies.
Yeah, absolutely. There's got to be that realism, because that's what makes it feel threatening.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too, when you put together sort of, I mean, when you think about what the overall story is, it's a little bit
convoluted
outside. Yeah, it's a little convoluted when you think about like, oh, okay, this town is just always has these strings of serial killers, and yet it works within this movie franchise because you always have that continuing timeline.
Yeah.
So you can at least say, well, within this universe, this is how things go down, because that's just how this universe operates.
Yeah. For me, I think my biggest takeaway is the decisions upon the writers to have and withhold certain information throughout the film. Like, they have information, and then whether they supply you with that information, even if you have that information from a reliable character, they have other reliable characters cast doubt on that specific information. So like the whole backstory with Sydney's mother in the first movie, you hear people talking about how she was a promiscuous woman, and you've got Sydney going, no, it's a lie. They're just smearing my mother's legacy, and it's this bitch with her book trying to get up her sales and sensationalize the murder and stuff like that. And then you've got her best friend come in and go, there's been rumors, like, you know what I mean? Like that kind of information, the way you, and like I said, with Billy's mom, you know what I mean? They are constantly dangling that whole, hey, don't forget about moms. Hey, don't forget about moms. And you're thinking about Sydney's mom, but it's like, no, Billy's mom. Like that to me is that kind of information that really needs to be there underlying your mystery, because the most important thing for a mystery movie is that it holds up on a second watch. When you watch it again, you don't feel cheated. Yes, information can be withheld because that's part of life. Like people lie to each other, they keep secrets. That kind of stuff is okay. But if you don't violate the truth of the motivation that's happening throughout the entire movie, then your audience feels like it's authentic, it's believable, it's real. You didn't get cheated. And that to me is the most important thing that you have to consider when you're writing a mystery. And a lot of people, this is clearly a whodunit type thing where you're trying to figure out who the killer is. But, so many other movie genres have mysteries at their heart, and they don't do them well. And that's the reason why, is because they're too focused on action set pieces or, MacGuffin devices or whatever it may be, that they're not paying attention to the information that they're supplying the audience, that they're tainting the audience with in terms of red herrings and things like that. Like you could put the same writing style of the Scream franchise into a Mission Impossible movie. And you could take away all the giant set pieces of the Mission Impossible movie. Now people would complain, why didn't Tom Cruise fall out of a building? But with all of that weird red herring type stuff, is this character a spy for the other team? Are they, is this the mole? Is this like that kind of shit will be compelling? Like that would really drive a movie. So like I'm looking at something like Mission Impossible. I'm like, they really need to put this kind of shit in those movies. But they tend to just stick to it with, oh, that's a Scream movie. That's what you do in a Scream movie. But it's not. That's how you build a mystery when you're telling a story. And I think a lot of writers, artists, storytellers should be aware of that, because I think it's a skill set, a tool that you can use in any kind of movie that you're doing, whether it's a comedy or rom-com, an action thriller. Those kinds of things are compelling to an audience. That's how you get the quote unquote edge of your seat audience member, like who's like trying to figure out what it is. And it's all about having and withholding information and revealing information, and that kind of thing can really be taken about, because no matter what you say about the motives or some of the overall storytelling from any one of these movies, this entire franchise is leaps and bounds above a majority of other horror franchises or franchises in general that have gone on as many movies as this has. Like, it's like pizza. No matter how bad it is, it's still a certain level of good. Even 4. I will admit there are aspects of 4 that I could still enjoy and be like, yeah, okay, it's, Scream 4 is better than Nightmare on Elm Street 6. Like, you know what I mean? Like, or like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 through 6. And it's not an unvalid point. Now, it really comes down to what your audience is after. There's gore hounds who are just like, oh, the kills in that movie suck. And I'm, all right, go watch your.
I mean, that's the funny thing about the Scream movies is like, I'm not really watching them for the kills.
No.
And like, I think that's what got me into enjoying them.
Yes.
Because like I was saying, I think at the beginning is I did kind of go into this with the expectation that it was going to be a slasher type movie. And I mean, there are some kills that are like
absolutely
that are pretty gruesome. But those are all feel like ultimately they feel like payoffs.
Yeah.
For something that is being established that's actually more interesting than those payoffs.
They're in service of the story, which is what a lot of horror movies, at least horror sequels, get wrong, where they make it all about the kills and all about the gore and all about the special effects. And it's like, in these movies, not so much. Like, they'll up the blood count or whatever like that because the killer's supposed to because of the rules or whatever. But that's not why you go to the Scream movie. You go to the Scream movie because you want to try and play that game of Clue. You want to try and guess who it was. And that's the fun of it all, in my opinion, which is why when this movie was announced, I was like, I don't want to know a fucking thing. If anybody is like a Scream spoiler hound, you're a fucking moron, because the whole point of this movie, the whole fun of this movie is trying to figure it out. And I don't know why you would want anything spoiled or anything. And I'm a spoiler hound on most things. Like, I spoiled like parts of Spider-Man No Way Home and, you know, all the other like Batman movies and stuff. I have no problem. Star Wars, Luke shows up as a Force ghost. Okay, well, whatever. It doesn't detract from my viewing of that movie when I watch those. But when I watch these, I don't want to know shit. I debated for the longest time whether I even wanted to watch the trailers for Scream 5. I was just like, I just want to go in cold. I know what I'm getting probably. I don't need to be, convinced to go see this movie, so why watch a trailer? Anyway, the movie did okay, box office wise. It is yet to be seen if they'll make a sequel. My prediction, based on the box office receipts, everybody thinks they're a fucking box office analysis these days, myself included. But I take it, a step further. I try and know a little bit more about this business because it's important to me to know that as a filmmaker who is financing and making my own films. The movie did okay. A lot of people are like, "Oh, it made so great." And it's like, no, you're not factoring in the advertising budget, and you're not factoring in theater take. Because if the movie makes $100 million, $40 million of that goes back to the studio. $60 million of it goes to the theaters so they can pay for more popcorn and their employees and keeping the lights on and this and that. So in the end, the people who made the movie only made $40 million. Well, if the movie cost $80 million to make, no, they did not make their money back in opening weekend. So there's a lot of things to consider. If I had to guess, I think that there may be a sequel. It depends. The second week drop off wasn't that bad. But here's my prediction, and we're going to see if this holds up. If there is a Scream 6, the budget will be less. And because the budget will be less, the legacy characters who would return for the next movie either won't be a part of it. So you either won't see Sidney and Gale, or they will have like really minimal roles. And I mean like cameo level roles. I don't know necessarily if they'd be killed off, but I feel like it'd be more like Randy's videotape in Scream 3. Like you'd see Sam on like a Skype call with Sidney or something. You know what I mean? Like that's going to be the extent of what we get, because Nev Campbell knows that she draws asses in seats, and same thing with Courtney Cox. So it's like they're going to want more money. And if you're not going to make back that money, it's like, oh, we can't afford to spend it, so we're going to put you in the movie, but you're only going to be there for like a day. And that's how they justify it. So that's my guess because of how this went. We'll find out if I'm right or wrong. I don't know if they'll kill them or not. It's possible, but I would say it's likely that they won't. I'm guessing it'll be, if anybody, they'll kill Gale. I don't think they'll kill Sidney.
I would agree with that. I mean, if they are going to kill any legacy characters, probably Gale before Sidney, for sure.
Well, because then you have a very interesting thing, because if you did 6, you're going to try and do 7. I know that.
Unless Sidney becomes a Force ghost.
Well, but that would be the moment. In 7, you would bring her back, and that's like the final thing of like, you're the sole survivor now. And then you whatever you did with Sam's character, you intermingle those storylines, and you come up with some kind of resolution for both of them. Whether they both die, whether they commit suicide, whether they become psycho killers themselves, who knows? But that would be my guess, is that there would be a diminished role in 6, and they'll see how it performs, and then we'll see if we get 7 or not, and we'll go from there. I'm not banking on a 6 personally. I think it's going to be a gamble for because you also have to factor in this too. Not only the box office redeeming the budget that they spent on the movie, but a new company had to purchase the rights to Scream. from the Weinstein Company after it got disbanded. So there's the production budget, the advertising budget, and also what they fucking paid to own the franchise now. So that's an additional cost that people aren't factoring in. So at the end of the day, I don't know what the books read. So I don't know if they actually are making money on this movie. And any investor, they don't have a love for the franchise like the rest of us do. They're just going to say, listen, I lost money on that movie. I'm not looking to lose more money on the next one. So that's
I
the
will
end of
say
it.
If Scream 5 was it, I'd be perfectly happy.
Same here. I feel like Sam was okay. She was happily resolved at the end with her sister. I feel like Sydney was. I feel like Gail got some, resolution after Dewey got killed. You know what I mean? Like it felt like they all kind of did it. And they also, the way they split up Gail and Dewey in this movie or before this movie, like in the story wise, and then they had them kind of have a cathartic moment in the middle of it where they got together and they discussed what happened and this and that. And it really did feel like closure for those characters as well. So on all fronts, if 5 is the end of it, I'm a happy camper. And truth be told, the way these fucking movies go, and I don't mean Scream movies, I just mean movies in general, let's just end on a high note. Let's call it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's call it where it's at. Let's walk away from the table before we give more to the casino. Like it's a wrap, folks. Let's tie it up. So that has been our podcast on the Scream franchise. Hopefully we won't have to do another one talking about 6. But you never know. We will keep that door open just in case it does. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Curious to know your thoughts. I'm always down to talk Scream on Twitter at the Jow, so feel free to bother me with your nonsense theories about why 4 is better than 2. And unless Mr. Rainwater has anything more to add about the Scream movies or mystery storytelling, that'll be that.
Yeah, that'll be that.
All right, everybody. Good night.